Welcome to Meat Speak, powered by the certified Angus beef brand. Chances are this is the first time that you are tuning into this little space on the intra-podcasting world. And we appreciate you joining us. We appreciate you giving us your ear for a bit of time. My name is Brian. With me is Chef Tony Biggs. Chef, how you doing?
Brian, it's great to see you.
Wow.
This is our first podcast.
This is our first podcast. It's exciting, right? I've intentionally not drank quite as much coffee this morning, just because I'm so excited about where we're headed. You know, when you talk about meat, right? And I want to make sure that everybody understands we're here to discuss meat and meat in general. And we're not here taking a stance. We're not here to shift your line of thinking around meat. If you love meat, if you don't love meat, we are here to embrace what reality is, right? We are here to talk about meat, how it's showcased in various corners of the world, from chefs to butchers to farmers to meat scientists, and bringing some of the personalities to you of the people who have built their livelihood, their reputations around the sanctity of meat and the time-honored tradition that it is. Chef, you have cooked, I will say all corners of the world, but the world is round. So be that what you will. Can you talk a little bit about where you have been?
Well, Brian, God, it all started. Originally, I'm a seafood guy. I grew up on the coast of Massachusetts in the beautiful little seashore town of Cohasset. I started as a dishwasher, a pot washer at the Hugo's Lighthouse. Boy, this was a great seafood house, 1,000 covers a day, and I washed all the chefs' pots and pans till 4 o'clock in the morning, making minimum wage. This was my first job. And from there, I never looked back. I learned, I was a sponge. I wanted to learn everything about culinary. It was in my blood. I met my father when I was 15 years old, and he opened a 5-star restaurant in Clarence Center, New York, called the Granary Inn. I have done everything in that restaurant, from park cars to sing. I was a singing waiter, and that was the hook of our restaurant. Not only the food. This is the first time I had a filet mignon, and let me tell you, this was an epiphany.
So you started on filet mignon. Your career has taken you to an oil rig in the North Sea, to the Tokyo American Club, to the Philippines with Imelda Marcos, to the Middle East, cooking for the King and Queen of Jordan, to post-Katrina New Orleans, and ultimately where we are here. If you happen to have access to your Google Maps, you'd like to know, we are coming to you from the inner sanctum, from the basement of the world headquarters of Certified Angus Beef, which is about 40 miles south of Cleveland in a little town called Worcester, Ohio, where, Chef, every day you get to deal with meat. You get to deal with steak.
I have cooked all around the world, not necessarily beef in those cultural places where I was at, but now I started doing that. Let's give you an example. Indonesian beef rendang. That is an Indonesian beef stew, stewed in coconut milk. Galangal, which is a type of ginger, and different spices, and it is just aromatic, served with rice, cinnamon sticks, braised for hours, and it is absolutely magical, okay? I did this at the Culinary Center, and we do not teach folks how to cook or be chefs. We give them ideas with our beef, and that's what we do. Not only that, gosh, Argentina. Francis Mallman, my hero, has opened my eyes to fire cooking. And according to Gary Nackstead from NorCal Oven Works, who designs all our churrasco barbecue equipment, he is selling more and more Michelin star chefs around the world churrasco barbecue equipment, because now those guys want to cook with fire.
Yeah.
That is magical.
It's funny you bring that up. if you look back through the history of mankind, right? I mean, we're getting really deep here. If you look back over the past, 2 million years that humans have been on the earth. Before there were hunting tools, before there were things like that, humans would trap animals, right? They wouldn't use tools. I mean, it sounds kind of funny now. They would literally ambush animals, wrestle them to the ground, and then harvest their meat. It wasn't until about 250,000 years ago, and this is all just through research, and this is a notion that seems to be reasonably accepted across the scientific community. Scientists will surmise that it wasn't until humans began applying fire and heat to meat that we truly became human, because by cooking that meat over fire, it actually made those cuts of meat that were once raw more dense with calories, which gave the human body more energy, which allowed our brains to develop to the point where they are now. If you look at a human versus a gorilla, the human brain is much larger than it should be for our bodies. But you could surmise going all the way back to live fire cooking, honestly, is a reason that we are humans today, which I know is I mean, it kind of blew my mind coming across facts like that, but it's an interesting school of thought that now you're looking at because of folks like Francis Mallmann, that Michelin-starred chefs, people with tweezers in their chef coats, are going back to this idea that existed 250,000 years ago.
It's funny you should say that, because my new book that's going to come out is From Tweezers to Pitchforks. Okay? That is my name of my new book. And 2 years ago, when we were in San Antonio, I'm glad you brought this up, is because one of our functions were at a ranch, but it was also an Indian burial ground. And it was up on a hill. And we were given a tour of this area one day, and the gentleman said to us, "You see this big hill up here? Well, the Indians, what they would do is they would get the buffalo at the edge of the cliff and push them off, and they would fall and die. And that's how they would come down the cliff and actually skin the buffalo and then prepare their feast."
Yeah.
So it's interesting that you would say that.
That's fascinating. When I think of ambushing an animal, and I'm not a hunter, not because I'm necessarily opposed to hunting. I'm opposed to waking up at 4 a.m. Sitting in a tree when it's 20 below zero. But when I think of ambushing an animal, I think of like peacefully waiting for a deer to walk below and then just pounce on him, right? And wrestle it to the ground. So I appreciate that you have changed what ambushing an animal speaks to my psyche, at least.
Well, there were no guns. It was natural.
Yeah.
They had to eat. Folks had to eat back there. To your point, this was a way of survival, okay? So you catch a chicken, a bird, or a pheasant, or any kind of animal, a goat, and you prepare it as a feast. I mean, for your family. We do it today, but in a more civil way.
That's right. We do our hunting at the grocery store.
I love cooking with fire.
Yeah.
When I picked up a Francis Mallmann book and I saw the things he was doing with fire, it was just a natural, he's a Michelin star chef.
Yeah.
And he just turned from the tweezers to the pitchfork.
Yeah.
And he does a marvelous job. And he has restaurants all over the world. He's my hero.
Yeah. Chef, that's a fantastic segue. We are going to take a break, and we're going to come back with a chat with one of our good friends, a chef who, if you follow, the lore of the American chefs, I mean, there are a handful of icons that you can list from, honestly by one name, from Thomas to Grant to Trotter to kind of Danielle to you name it. And our guest coming up here in a moment is one who very much kind of fits into that group. And he has opened so many different restaurants, from Rochester, New York, to New York City, to Chicago, where he kind of built his name. And he's opened up all kinds of different concepts, from steakhouses to Italian to probably as his coup de grace is one of the best known fine dining restaurants in Chicago for more than 2 decades, to his current iteration, which is actually a Cajun Creole restaurant down in the French Quarter in New Orleans. We're going to be joined by Chef Rick Tramonto, the 2-time James Beard Award winner, and he's going to talk a little bit about his journey from his early days in Rochester, New York, and what it meant as a chef, regardless of that concept. The one thing that he never did was a vegetarian concept. He will admit he did a few vegetarian tasting menus in his time, but Rick's going to take some time with us, and Chef Tony and I will be back in a few. Joining us on the Meat Speak podcast here is our good friend, 2-time James Beard Award winner. And Chef, tell me if I leave anything out. I want to make sure I get it in there, right? Chef, author, television personality, connoisseur of caviar and large hunks of meat, Chef Rick Tramonto. Chef, how you doing?
Oh, yeah, you left out the metal fan, the heavy metal fan. Left that whole part out.
I can't believe I forgot. I can't believe I forgot the metalhead portion of that as well. Chef, as we were putting together sort of our list of things that we wanted to cover, and we wanted to talk about, we wanted to launch with a big rollout of meat and why it's important and why it matters and why it's necessary, and not necessarily getting into I guess the why or the debate of whether you should or shouldn't eat meat. It's just more the idea that it's a fact of life, and everywhere you go, people eat meat. You immediately came to mind because you've had such a diverse career. Of course, you are probably best known in the fine dining circuit at True in Chicago, which if you're not of the understanding, True, TRU actually stood for, I believe, Tramonto Unlimited, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
That's right.
But you've opened countless restaurants, everything from osterias to, Italian, fine dining, seafood, Cajun Creole down in New Orleans to, to the burger joints that you started on. And every concept, meat played a specific role, both in terms of what you were cooking and what the menus were featured on. And I just wanted to see if you could give us a little bit of background on your journey, because the more people who understand kind of your background and where you're coming from, it's been quite the ride. Yeah.
Yeah, it sure has, and meat is always home for me, and it's always comforting because, when I was, 15 years old in 1977, I started at Wendy's Old Fashioned Hamburgers, which was one of the very first Wendy's outside of Cleveland, outside of Ohio, and in Rochester, New York. And, that's back when Dave Thomas was still in the stores, and Dick Fox, who still to this day is one of the largest franchise owners of that group. And, those guys were just starting out. So my introduction to cooking, other than, just as a kid hanging around my grandmother and my mom, who were always in the kitchen, again, making pastas and tripe, it's funny. That's, all the Italian, bragioles and all those kind of things were regulars in my house. But we weren't prime, let's have filet, let's throw something on the grill kind of family growing up. It was a pretty modest family. My dad went to prison when I was a kid, and being an only child, I just needed to, stick close to home. I didn't finish high school. I needed to start working, and, working at a burger joint really just kind of made sense. And this was one of the up and coming, restaurants of that era coming up. So, it all kind of connected. So that's the first introduction. And they did everything on premise. They were grinding their own meats and they were pattying their own meats. And, it was pretty amazing when they first started out on how they did stuff there. And it was very special. And then I had a chance to work at a place called the Scotch and Sirloin, which is, just a famous old school Rochester, Buffalo, Syracuse steakhouse that again, a guy named Jim Kurtz, who was a Vietnam vet who came back and just loved to cook and set up this amazing, they aged all their own stuff. They cut all their own stuff. There was a full-time butcher. There was dual broilers and prime rib stations. And, for a whole year, all I did is, basically work the spud station. You bake potatoes, you mash potatoes, you do everything potatoes, scallop potatoes, and you just work this potato station in order to get up to the next level, which would be working the prime rib station, and then working the broiler station, working the grill station. And if you were, if you were lucky, or you were hungry enough, you would come in during the day because they weren't open for lunch, and you would just learn how to cut meat and stand next to these butchers and trim and grind and slice meat and wrap and weigh and just be an apprentice. And that was pretty, eye opening, because I had never seen that. So, timeline now, I'm about 18 and I get the opportunity to move to Manhattan and work with Alfred Portali at the Gotham, and all of that started to come full circle. But through the journey, meat has always been key. And the interesting thing is, probably 5 years of that, I worked the Poissonnier station. I worked the fish station mainly in New York at the Tavern on the Green and Gotham and La Gonouille. So, I was always wanting to get on the meat station. And once I had, perfected, per se, the fish station, it was really the next step for me. And it was, love it first seer, right? I mean, it was just all about it. And again, I think it's really been a huge part of my menu mixes, especially when I went to Europe and really started to interact with game and braising and all of that culture of that market of England and France and Italy. There's nothing like it.
As you look at, you mentioned working at Gotham. It was at a time, looking back, when you were one of several I guess young line cooks sort of cutting their teeth along with some others. You may know the names like Bobby Flay or Tom Colicchio. And things like that. I mean, when you look back at kind of those days, I mean, Gail Gann working the pastry station, right? I mean, do you look back at that as, I mean, it's as a pretty incredible time to be coming up, especially when you look at the culinary landscape now, to look back and say, man, what we were a pretty fantastic group that all pretty much came good.
Yeah, I couldn't have asked for a better journey as far as a non-traditional going to culinary school, going to apprentice, and to go right into the field as an apprentice in 81, 82, and working in New York until 90. So that whole period of time, you're right. I mean, there was just an amazing time of chefs coming on the scene like Larry Forgione and Jonathan Waxman and Alfred Portali, and this powerhouse list of New York chefs that had all these powerhouse line cooks that were so passionate, like Tom and Bobby and Gail and all of that. And it was just incredible. And everybody knew that that this was something special. I think if you ask any of those guys, they will certainly say that it was a very electric time in cooking, and especially in New York. And then when I finally got to Chicago, it was a whole other thing. I mean, it was like Charlie Trotter and Jean Boucher and Gabino Sautalino and all, Jean Joho. And then just having the opportunity to start to do some of your own stuff. I did Trio and I did True. And
yeah. Chef, you mentioned Chicago, and of course, everybody talks about, of course, True, which had a fantastic run. But before True, you guys, you hooked up with this restaurant up in Evanston called Trio, which, if you look at the lineage that came through Trio, when you guys left, Sean McLean came in. When Sean McLean left, this guy named Grant Achatz, who you may have heard of, came in there before moving on to Alinea, and the rest is history.
Yeah. So, I mean, it really was again, it was like the perfect storm and the perfect timing of that time. Henry Adagna, who was just coming out of Cafe Provençal and Ambria, had the opportunity to buy this, this space, and to go into the space where Cafe Provençal was, to turn it into, something very special. And he knew he really wanted a husband and wife team, a pastry chef and chef team. We all kind of had some knowledge of each other, because we all worked for Let Us Entertain You, and he was at Ambria, and I was at Avanzari and Scusi at the time, and Gail was doing a bunch of stuff at the Pump Room and at corporate, and so we knew each other. And Henry just kind of reached out and said, "Hey, I got this crazy idea. I don't have any money, but I have a space, and let's try to build something, for a couple $100,000 and see what we can do." And and me and Gail had just come back from Europe, and I was like, man, how are we going to do this? How are we going to compete with all this amazing downtown talent? And we didn't have a cellar. We didn't have China. We didn't have, it was just no money. So we just said, well, we'll go in and we'll treat it like our first apartment. I mean, we'll put on our, sweatpants and go in and start scrubbing and painting and buying used equipment and do everything we can. And towards the end, we didn't have a lot, if not any, for China. And it was such an important piece to what we wanted to do. So we started to go to thrift shops, and we started to go to Builders Square and like these Home Depot places, and just started to buy, slabs of granite and marble and glass and mirror, and just started to present our stuff on that. And, from a piece of Limoges that's $80 a piece to a piece of marble or glass, which was $8 a piece. We went in, we started doing multi-course tasting menus and multiple course dessert courses in our tasting menus. And Henry ran an amazing dining room, and we were able to procure some of the wine cellar that was already there. So we had, okay wine lists, but man, by the time Bill Rice and people like Phil Vitale were coming in reviewing us, and it just exploded. I mean, we had gotten 4 stars across the board, and people were starting to make pilgrimages up to Evanston like they were up to Wheeling to go to Le Francais. And, we found ourselves, 6, 8, 10 weeks out in reservations, and it was a very cool time. It was a very special time. It was very pure. There was no fluff. It was all, center of the plate kind of stuff. And there from 7 a.m. till 1 a.m, 6 days a week, grinding it out, and it really paid off. And Gail got an opportunity on the Food Network to do a show called Sweet Dreams, and then we got to sign our first two books, and we did a brasserie called Brasserie Tea, did another book, and then I had an opportunity to do a huge deal with Lettuce to go down, and Henry kind of went on with Sean and me and Gail to do True, and the rest is kind of history. I mean, James Beard Awards and Rally Chateau, Rally Gourmands, and everything just kind of happened because our budget, in some ways was extraordinarily different. I mean, we opened one restaurant for $250,000. We opened another restaurant for $5 million. So our China budget was $100,000 at True. So we really had all the luxuries a second time around, but in a lot of ways the results were still the same. I mean, we won a Wine Spectator Award at True, where we weren't able to do that at Trio. But as far as the rest of the accolades and the rest of the grind and putting a much larger team together, because we were doing more volume. So Trio, we would do 70 covers a night. True, we were doing, almost 200 covers a night, but with 10 courses for each person. So you're still grinding 1,000 plates out of that kitchen. And a lot of great people came out of that kitchen. I mean, Chris Pandell and Greg Biggers and Meg Gullis, and, the list goes on and on. I mean, Graham Elliott, and, we had a very, just almost like the same thing that me and Gail had experienced in New York. I'm hoping a lot of the kids that came out of the kitchen and now have their own television shows and their own restaurants can now go back and say, man, you remember our time at True? Remember our time at Trio? And, we really produced a lot of good talent out of those kitchens. I think that's what we're most proud of for sure.
Yeah. Can you talk about, getting into True a little bit? I remember sitting around a table actually at Spencer's in Omaha, Nebraska with you and Gail. I mean, you were telling just stories that would happen at True, and it's something that the culinary world has sort of moved away from fine dining. But when you think about, I guess before True, there are all those stories from the old pump room in Chicago. But some of the stories that you would come out with, be they, the Chicago Bulls in their heyday or whatever at True, I mean, were just mind blowing. I mean, can you talk about some of those nights? And did you?
Yeah, I mean, it was really became a celebrity haunt. We had a great relationship with all the hotels in the neighborhood, and we would always hold reservations for them, like the Peninsula and the Ritz and the Four Seasons, and we had great concierge relationships. So anytime celebrities or musicians or athletes were in town and they wanted to come, we always tried to accommodate. For sure we would hold tables for them, and it was a very sought after table. And you'd have wacky experiences. Like there was a night where Robin Williams came in and was there promoting Bicentennial Man with his producer and director. And very, very kind man. He came into the kitchen, loved the meal, and wanted to know if he could serve the last set of desserts to the table that was there. And me and Gail just kind of looked at each other and chuckled, but he said, no, I can do it. And he put on his best French accent and started to pick up plates like a professional. He looked like a professional waiter. Walked around the table and Gail explained what it was, and he was able to recite it verbatim to the table. And people were looking up going, is that Robin Williams? Like, started looking for, like, is this candid camera? Like, what's going on? But he never broke character. So I think that there was this confusion of either this is Robin Williams or this is like the most incredible lookalike of Robin Williams. And he just did this whole spiel and like walked away and then turned around and gave him a smirk and broke character and started, cracking up, and they realized who he was. And those are the moments in a restaurant where you remember and you laugh and people get it. And, it is food and hospitality. Michael Jordan would come in, Oprah Winfrey would come in. I mean, the list is just too long to spit, but it was fun for my crew, because most of those folks would come back and just kind of show the respect and the gratitude. And it was a blast. That part was pretty extraordinary, I think, for that restaurant. And it was a busy restaurant, like we said at Trio. I mean, we were 6-8 weeks in advance, but at True we were 6-8 months in advance all the time. So, I mean, I was proud of it. It was a 10-year run, and it was really an amazing time.
Yeah. That's incredible. Chef, one of the links from True that, still continues with you to this day was, you had a young cook named Jenna Biot, who is now, of course, the chef at your restaurant located in the French Quarter of New Orleans called Restaurant Revolution. Can you talk a little bit about that project and how that came to be post Hurricane Katrina? And if people go in now, what is the story behind Restaurant Revolution?
Yeah, it's really amazing, steps of events. Me and John Foltz had known each other for quite a long time, and we would see each other at NRA shows and fancy food shows. And John was, in a whole different set of chefs. He was very much in with, food manufacturing chefs, but he was also, the president of the ACF and many of the chef organizations. So every year when there was a restaurant show or a Shen dinner, John would always show up at True, and, we'd always have a lot of fun. And then he would invite me down to New Orleans to his bittersweet plantation. And we would, all of that was just a great camaraderie of years. And one day you're sitting at home watching the Today Show, and, Katrina's unfolding. And, my wife Eileen had said, hey, you should call John and see how he's doing. And I'm like, oh, they have those hurricanes all the time down there. It's probably no big shake, But as, 1 hour turned into 4 hours and you start to see the whole thing unfold, I'm like, yeah, I should probably call him and see how he's doing, And you call John, and anybody that speaks to John, he's always a very upbeat, very, very positive guy from the second he picks up the phone. And you could just tell. And when I tried to call him, he didn't answer, tried to call him, he didn't answer. He finally answered and said, "Hey man, how you doing?" And, there's this long pause, and that's not like John at all, and he says, "Well, I'm not good." I said, "What can I do to help you?" And he said, "Well, would you come down?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Would you get on a plane and come down?" He said, "I have all the contract feeding for FEMA and the National Guard. We're going to go right down into the ground zero into hurricane zone in St. Bernard's Parish and set up mobile kitchens and just start cooking for all the rescue workers. And I would love to have somebody help me lead that." I said, "Yeah." I said, can you get me in?" He said, and John's so connected to that world. And he said, "Yeah, I'll get you a ticket. I'll make sure you get in, tomorrow. I'll be there to pick you up." And he said, the airport's a triage center. So, you'll have the National Guard like escorting you and down into St. Bernard's Parish. And I said, "Yeah, okay, great." And, I've never been to war. I've been in a war zone to cook a few times in Afghanistan and stuff. So, I kind of had the gist of what I was walking into, but you still don't really know what you're walking into. Right. And by the time I got there and we got into John's vehicle and we started going down into the city, it was, I don't even know how to describe it. It was empty. It was just, there was no one on the highway. It was eerie. It was dark. It was a mess. We pulled up over onto the overpass and he stops his vehicle and he says, "Get out." And I'm like, "Okay." So we get out and we walk in front of his car and we're standing in the middle of the expressway and he's pointing to the dome, and the roof of the dome is slapping off, and he's like, "Look around." And you couldn't see any cars, anybody for miles or miles, except for our little caravan that we were stopped. And he says, "You'll never see this again." And I still have footage of that and photos of that. And we get back in the vehicle, we go down into St. Bernard's Parish, and for 3 weeks we cooked for rescue workers. And John has a food manufacturing plant, so we had access to just trucks and Starbucks and Kraft. It was a pretty extraordinary time. And when we were done, 4 weeks later, per se, John drops me off at the airport, and I said, "Life's never going to be the same, man." He goes, "This is a life-changing time." He says, "Yes, when they start to rebuild the city, you'll be the first I call." And about a year to almost the date later, he called and said, "Hey, I have this incredible opportunity. They're starting to rebuild. The Royal Sonesta wants us to do a signature restaurant in there. And you pretty much have carte blanche to go in, and we'll concept the Seven Nations, and we'll do all the Louisiana historical food, put your twist on it and all your stuff from your modern age True and Trio, and let's come up with something special and, try to reopen the city with a bang, and we ended up doing Restaurant Revolution. It's been 8 years now we've been down there. And restaurant of the year, and many accolades from that restaurant. But my crew at True was I came back and told them all these stories, and Jana was a sous chef at True at that time, and she said, "Hey chef, I don't know if you know this, but I'm from that area." And I said, "Yeah, I knew you were kind of from New Orleans and Louisiana." She goes, "No, I'm really from like the Bayou, and I went to John Folse's culinary school." And I'm like, she says, "And I would love to move back home. If there's any opportunity for you to take me with you, I would love to do that." And I had brought in 5 people with me from Chicago to go down and do that opening: a pastry chef, a somm, a GM, and Jana. And we all went and did this R&D up in John's plantation for a year, almost 8 months, a year before we opened. And Jana relocated down there, and she's been there ever since.
If you have an opportunity to get down to Restaurant Revolution, it really is everything it's ever been cracked up to be. For you, I'd imagine it's got to be pretty gratifying when you look at some of those historical New Orleans restaurants, the Commander's Palaces, places like that, and you see Restaurant Revolution, which, by comparison is still in its infancy. Showing up on a lot of those same lists. It certainly has.
Yeah, but when you see the Galatoires and the Antons and the Commanders and, the Mr. B's, those are institutions that have been there, 20, 30, 40 years. 100 years for some of them, right? It's extraordinary. So, it's been And again, it's been multiple rides at multiple times and multiple cities, and to tie it all in, meat's been there every step of the
That's
way.
right. So right, coming back full circle on where we're at now. You've crafted, I don't know how many dishes over the years. Many, right? Too many to count. When you think about what are some of those, I will say meat-centric dishes that really stick out in your mind that have hit your menu. I mean, when I think of you, the first thing that pops into my head is, of course, the caviar staircase, right? But beyond that, I guess, what are some of your favorite things to cook?
It's just old school. I mean, braised short rib has been on my menu since Trio. I've always had a short rib, and there's just something romantic about that cut and about that presentation that it's timeless. It will always be timeless. It goes back and further, and it goes back forever into the cellars of cooking time, and it's just been a very special dish for me. And I'll always have that as part of my repertoire. And I always love to go back to classic everything, and going back to LaRousse, and going back to Escoffier, and going back to Bocuse, and really seeing, some of the meat fabrication, but just, the meat techniques is so much braise from odd cuts and non-primal cuts that I just love it. Just love it.
Excellent. Chef, I appreciate you taking time out of your very busy schedule to get with us this week.
Anytime, man. Anytime. Love you guys and appreciate you and everything you guys do, and stay well.
Back here in the studio, Bryan Schaff, Chef Tony Biggs on the Meat and Greek podcast, being brought to you by the Certified Angus Beef brand. Now, Chef, one of the things that I want to make sure everybody understands is that although we are in the building of the world's foremost beef company that exists here in Northeast Ohio, we're not just all about beef, but we do love the beef. And you are one who has gotten to rack up a lot of frequent flyer miles traveling the world. And, when I think of beef in its raw state, two things pop to mind with me. Tartare, which I would step over my own grandmother to get to, right? Especially my favorite tartare is Jonathan Sawyer's at the Greenhouse Tavern in Cleveland, because it's made with Cleveland Stadium mustard, which is near and dear to my heart, and of course beef carpaccio, which if you are not a raw beef person, right? Beef carpaccio to me that should be your jumping off point, because it's kind of like deli meat, I guess. I mean, it's raw, but it doesn't feel like it's raw. But yeah, Chef, what are your go-tos when you talk about raw meat?
Around the world, did you know around the world there's so many different variations of raw beef that is being served here today around the world? In Korea it's called yuko, which is a raw beef with soy sauce and ginger and garlic and sesame oil, and it's beautiful. It's delicious. It's an Asian steak tartare, right? In Japan it's called tataki. Okay, so it's marinated lightly. Ponzu and radish, and it's lovely. It's light. It's beautiful. In France, of course, steak tartare is served with beautiful pickles and some steak frites, which is a very thin cut French fry, and that's beautiful over there. But my favorite is the Belgian toast cannibal. Now, we're not eating real people here, okay? We're eating filet mignon, but in Belgium, it is called Belgian toast cannibal.
Not exactly wizards of menu names in Belgium. So why not cannibal toast?
Why not, right?
Why not?
But I wonder, I don't think a lot of folks know that a raw beef was not invented in America or France. It's served all around the world,
yeah.
and blended with the right spice blends, like the kibanaya in the Middle East, with different spices and peppers and the 7-spice Mediterranean spice. This is magical when it's on the right vehicle for crunch.
Yeah, I would actually argue not only was the idea of eating raw meat in a formalized setting, not talking about caveman days anymore, not only was it not invented in America, I would argue that America is probably one of the most difficult places to make that sell to the general population. If you go to Japan and you're American, it kind of can evolve into a game of let's see what the American will eat. And we're talking, raw chicken and raw, you kind of name it, and it's widely accepted.
I won my wife's hand. Do you know how I won my wife's hand?
Tell us.
I was sitting at the dinner table with her Chinese father, Paul. And we're on a laureate. That's a round circular table that you can spin around, most likely in a Chinese restaurant. Well, they have this in their living room. I was a guest for dinner, and Paul said to me the following: "Do you like exotic food, Tony?" I go, and I was being bold. I knew there was no exotic food around. I said, "Of course, Paul. I'm a chef." He gave $5 to the guy next to him, and he goes, "Go get 15 balut now." So this gentleman ran out. I'm going to myself, I'm in big trouble here. Do you know what balut is, Brian? Balut is a Fear Factor cuisine. It's a duck embryo, okay? And when you peel it, all the little feet, the legs, the beak are showing. He challenged me to eat the balut to win his daughter's hand. I said, Paul, the only way I'm going to do this is I need a bottle of Jack Daniels here so I can take 3 shots. And I consumed 3 balut in a matter of minutes with 3 shots of Jack Daniels, looked him in the eye and said, "Take that, brother."
And okay, the big question now is, since that date, how many balut have you consumed?
Since that date, 0. 0 balut.
Okay, so if you were questioning, we're not saying that balut is delicious or not.
Well, because
you can read between the lines.
In the Philippines, it's a delicacy, usually found on streets, steamed.
Yeah.
So if you're talking to the Filipino culture, let me back up. My wife is Filipino, so I can say these things. That is a delicacy here, and it's one of those street foods.
If this is your first foray into the Meat Speak podcast, please know that you can find us across most major podcasting platforms by typing in Meat, M-E-A-T, Speak, S-P-E-A-K, or simply by searching Certified Angus Beef Podcast, and you should see us looking right back at you. That's all we got for this week, Chef. Until next week, we'll see you later.